Good morning, everyone. Happy Wednesday. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. My name is Nicole Nickerson, and I am the College Access and FAFSA Outreach Manager for NCSEAA. We're so excited to have Shannon Harris with us this morning to present on all of the updates for the 2022-2023 FAFSA. A few things before we get started. I am going ahead and putting some instructions in the chat if you are having issues with audio. And then if you have any questions throughout this presentation, please feel free to put them in the questions bar. I have a few colleagues on with me who will be answering questions as we go along. And of course, we'll be answering questions at the end. So I will not take any more of your time and go ahead and present to you Shannon Harris. Thank you again, Shannon.
You're welcome. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining in. Again, I'm Shannon Harris, and I am one of the assistant directors in the financial aid office at UNC Charlotte. Today, just wanted to give you a brief overview of the 22-23 updates for the FAFSA application, which is basically the free application for federal student aid. So today, we'll actually cover a few items here. The first thing that we'll discuss are going over the FAFSA link. We'll also look at the access options for the financial aid application. We'll review the FSA ID, what it is, and who actually needs it. We'll review FAFSA changes and enhancements. We'll also give you the contact information for all of the NACEA representatives based on your area. And also we'll take in questions, as Nicole mentioned. You can actually put in questions in the chat, but also we'll have room for questions at the end of the presentation. The first thing is actually beginning with the financial aid application, beginning with the FAFSA. The application is available for the 22-23 award year, and it's actually done online, and the website is listed there at the top of the screen. Again, this application is always available October 1st of every year, and this one application will determine a student's eligibility for grants, loans, and the federal work-study program. Grants are funds that students actually receive and don't have to be repaid. Loans, just like a home loan, car loan, those are funds that students receive that have to be repaid. And then also the federal work-study program. The federal work-study program is basically where students actually have a part-time position on campus. They normally here at our campus work around 20 hours a week, and we work around the student schedule, and that student earns a paycheck on a monthly basis. And with that, the money that the student earns or receives is from the Department of Education directly. Now, the applications actually going to FAFSA form is going to take in the student's demographic and financial information from the 2020 tax year. So you will need tax information in order to complete the application. And again, always most important, because there are funds that are limited with some of our institutional grants and state grants. So it's always best to encourage students to complete the application early. I always tell students, either put a reminder in your phone, tell Siri to remind you, something in your phone or on your calendar to remind you to complete the application each year, because students have to reapply every year. So freshman through senior year, they'll do the application beginning October 1st. There are different options to complete the financial aid application. The first one is actually going to be the FAFSA on the web, the website that was presented on the previous slide. Students can do the application online. In addition, there's also an app that students can use that the federal government has created. It is My Student Aid mobile app, where students can complete the full application start to finish on their phones as well. FAA or financial aid administrators also have access online, where we can go in, help the student with the application, in addition, make corrections or updates to the FAFSA application. And then the last option, paper FAFSA, or there's also an option for students to do the FAFSA on the phone. So there is someone that will help the students step by step. If they call the number, they'll be able to get assistance by completing the application over the phone. We do highly encourage students to complete the application online. Again, studentaid.gov is the website to complete the application. This is the preferred method because there are built-in skip logic that allows the students to skip questions based on how they answer questions. So depending on how they answer questions, they may be able to skip information that doesn't necessarily apply to them, which pretty much streamlines the process for the student. In addition to that, both student and parent, if required, have to have what we call an FSA ID, and that serves as their electronic signature on the application. And again, both student and parent have to have that FSA ID. And I just want to add, in addition to completing the application online, there are easier steps, meaning with the tax information on the FAFSA form, student and parent have the option to do what we call an IRS DRT data retrieval tool, where when it's time for students to put in and parents to put in their tax information onto the application, the DRT tool allows the student to basically take their information from the IRS and it will automatically pull the information onto their application, which makes it a lot easier and less errors are made when students and parents use the DRT tool. So this, I think, is one of the best things that they've done with the FAFSA to help the students and the parents to actually complete the application in an easier way. And with that, by doing the application online, there's also, with the federal government, they allow for check for errors, where a student, depending on how they answer the question, they will actually ask the student, are you sure? Is this correct? If they seem that something is incorrect, that may be incorrect on the application. So this is always the best method to use versus doing a paper form or actually doing it over the phone as well. Again, who needs an FSA ID? Again, this is the electronic signature that the student and parent will use to sign their FAFSA form. Both student and parent will have to have an FSA ID. Students will use this FSA ID in order to use the DRT tool. In addition to signing the application, students will also use it to sign a master promissory note. A master promissory note is basically where a student goes online and electronically signs that they promise to pay a loan if they choose to take out a student loan. In addition to that, students will also use their FSA ID to complete what we call loan counseling or entrance counseling. This basically goes over the terms and conditions of the loan if a student actually chooses to take a loan. And over the course of their academic history, these students will also be able to view their financial aid history. If they've taken out any loans, their grant eligibility, all of that information, they'll log on to studentaid.gov to view this information and again, use that FSA ID. As far as parents, in addition to signing the application, they'll also use this to use the data retrieval tool on the FAFSA form. And if parents actually choose to take out what we call a plus loan, that's a loan that's in parents' name to help cover any additional educational expenses. Parents will also need that FSA ID in order to complete the application process. And I just want to reiterate as well, make a note that parents without a Social Security number can't obtain an FSA ID. In order to complete the financial aid application, they must actually print a form, a signature page, sign it, and mail it in for processing. They won't be able to complete the application online. So once they go through the entire process, if they don't have a social, they'll just print the signature page, sign it, and mail it in for processing. Going over some of the enhancements and changes to the 22-23 application. When a student goes in to actually complete the application, it will ask for the role selection. So this year, when a student initially starts the financial aid form, it will ask the student who they are as far as whether they're the student, if they're the parent completing the application, or if they're the preparer of the application. If someone is actually helping someone else complete it for a student, they'll select that option for preparer if they're not the parent. Students can also log in anywhere on the for the financial aid application on the studentaid.gov website. If a student actually logs into or accesses the studentaid.gov website with their username and their FSA ID, once they go to the FAFSA form, they won't be asked to provide their credentials again when they access the form, since they're already logged in to the studentaid.gov website. And under the another user option, if the user needs another user to provide the FSA ID credentials in the application, meaning if a student wants their parent to sign it, or if their parents want to use the FSA or DRT tool, the user or the student will need to have the parent enter their FSA ID if they hadn't previously done it on the application. Continuing on with additional changes and enhancements, there are new menu options on the FAFSA form. Same information, but it's just reworded on the FAFSA application. Previously, it read FAFSA summary, and now there is a section that says review FAFSA form. Reset has been named to reset FAFSA form. It's been expanded, and then cancel correction is now correction entry. So those are minor changes that they've made to the financial aid application on the headings on the application form. There's also been updates to some of the tax information or tax questions on the application. FAFSA updates changes indicate now removing the information that applies to any virtual currency. So that information or that piece has been removed from the question, and the question has been revised, and it shows there in the blue section, where again, they're taking out any reference or any information asking for any virtual currency on the application. And also the responses for the student and spouse question. The type of tax return file has been updated and no longer include the reference to the IRS 1040 NREZ. The IRS 1040 NREZ form is the tax form for non-resident aliens with no dependents. So that has that no longer actually is listed on the FAFSA form. There also are some household updates on the financial aid application. And it actually changed the way a user actually provides their information. And again, with this skip logic and also checking for errors, there's also ways that the application will automatically assume or automatically calculate based on how a student answers questions. So it changes the way a user can provide their household information. The questions are worded a little bit different this year. In addition to that, there's a presentation of household size totals. It gives it in more of a table form, and I'll show you more in detail on the next slide. And also changes to the wording have been revised on the application as well, and we'll review that in just a second. Household information, again, going through the application. If a student answers yes to having children, it will then prompt them to enter the number of children in the household, and then it will give the total number in the household that will also include the student. So it will automatically account for the student in addition to their children to give them the total number of people in the household that should be reported on the FAFSA. I've known in previous years, a lot of students sometimes get this question a little confused with who to add and the total number in the household. So this makes it a little bit easier because it will detail who they need to include on the application, and it will figure the totals for the student, which makes it a lot easier when completing the application. And again, as I mentioned before, the view on the application will show in a table view. So in this example, the household size is 4. It will actually show the student, their children, and if they have any other dependents, to give them a total number that's in the household. And for an independent student, meaning a student that does not have to include parents' information on their application, it will include their spouse, depending on how they answer the marital status question, their children, and if they have any other dependents in the home that they actually provide for, to give them the total household size. And it's also been revised, the number in household that are attending college question. For an independent student on this view, it will ask them to include themselves in this number when it asks how many people in the house are actually attending college, and it gives the time frame of when the student will be attending. So it will ask the student for an independent student to include themselves in the household. And we'll go over a dependent example in just a moment as well. The next slide here, again, that table format for a dependent student, it will look a little different. For a dependent student, it's first going to ask the number of parents' children, and then it's going to ask how many dependents do your parents have other than children, and you'll enter the number, the student will enter the number, and then it will give the total number of dependents in the household. Now, keep in mind that it will also include parents on this app on the total household size. Based on how the student answers their parents' marital status, it will also include parents in addition to the student and the student's parents, other dependents that are in the household, to give a total number. But when the student sees it initially, it's going to give them the total number of dependents in the household, but later in the application, it will show the total number in the household. Also, for a dependent student where there have been changes to the number in college question, it's highlighted there at the bottom where it asks them, out of the number of dependents in your parents' household, how many people will be in college between this time frame, July 1st, 22 through June 30th of 2023. For dependent students, on their application, they cannot include parents on their financial aid application. However, if parents are actually attending school and completing the form, parents can include children in the number in college on their FAFSA form, but a dependent student cannot. So the biggest change on this question, it tells the student, don't include your parents in the number of people that are attending college. Also in the application, there's a parent clarification update. On the financial aid form, it's going to indicate who is a parent and who to include in on the application and what information needs to be provided based on a parent's marital status. So there is a new view that has been created that appears at the beginning of that section before you put in parents' information to guide them to actually provide the correct parents' information. So whether a student has a parent that has remarried, it's going to indicate that they need to include mom. Let's say, for instance, mom has remarried. It will be mom and step parent that would need to be included if student lives with mom. So it gives them detail about all of the information in detail form, but there also are links. A student can actually have a visual of the information as well to make sure that they're including the correct parent on the application. Also, there's a section or a summary section on the application. So after a user completes the section on their FAFSA form, if they want to go back to make sure everything is correct or review any answers on their application or change anything, there is a section bar at the top of the view when a student can actually go in, select each section, and it will give them a drop-down view and show all the questions or all the answers that they provided for that particular section. And then from there, they'll have the opportunity to return to where they left off in the application, but just know that this summary section will appear the same way in the FAFSA summary option or FAFSA summary view, but it will only show one section at a time. So it's going to show all the information, all the questions, and all the answers that were provided, but then they can actually go back and to continue the application if they left off in a certain spot on the form. Under the sign and submit changes section on the FAFSA form, they have streamlined the path through the sign and submit portion of the application. If a student, if a user actually selects a prepares information view, at the end of the application, when it's time to actually sign it, this view is only going to be visible if that role is selected at the beginning of the application, where they'll have to put in additional information versus what the student and the parent put in at the end of the application, because this student or this preparer is actually providing the information for the student and helping the student complete it. So there is additional information that they will have to provide on the application. Also, users will be directed to sign for their role rather than choosing which signature to provide on the application, and that is under the signature status view. And then also a user signed in as a parent will be directed to provide their signature before having the opportunity to provide the student's signature as well. So it'll automatically direct them through the application on the signatures when they're going through the process. And again, users logged into the studentaid.gov website will be able to sign the FAFSA form from a different view from the agreement of terms view. Students can actually sign it there. And then if they're providing one of the parent signatures on the application, they'll be directed to provide their signature rather than a spouse. So it will automatically know to send it to the parent versus a spouse, depending on how the student answered the questions on the application. And if a student or a user chooses to print their signature page on the signature options view on the application, they'll be taken directly to a separate view to print their signature. But under the signature status view, users or students will have to choose to print their signature page. So it all depends on which view you're on. It will prompt what information will be provided and where they'll send them based on which view they're under on the application. Under the Student Aid Redesign and Add-in School Code section, the Student Aid Report is also called a SAR. There have been a redesign. The Student Aid Report is basically a summary of all the information that a student provided on their financial aid application. Once it has been submitted, students can go in and view their Student Aid Report, and it will also have a comment section if the student needs to go in, make any changes. That information will be revised or be displayed on the comment section to have a student go in and revise or make corrections to the application if required. But on the new redesign, under the Student Aid Report section, students can actually review different sections at one time. There is a panel box on the left-hand side of the screen that will appear that allows the user to select which section of the Student Aid Report they want to go to and view. That is new or redesigned for this year. And also a history corrections are also available on the Student Aid Report. So anytime a student has a processed application, if they go in, make any changes, any corrections are updated and processed by the Central Processing Center. And every time a student makes a correction, that there basically will be a history of corrections that a student can go in and review. Also on the application, students will be required to add a school code on their application. Basically, where do you want your information sent and what school? So every school will have a school code listed on the application, and that will be, student can actually search by putting in the school name or the city and state on their application. So students can list, I think it's up to 10 schools on the application now, and users are eligible to complete the FAFSA correction now, and they can add their school code to the application when they're going in and revising the application. So basically with this section, if a student's their only change is to add a school code, they'll be able to do that under the correction entry view. And the user will also be able to update their list of colleges from their My FAFSA view. And they don't have to, if they're doing it under this view, they'll be able to submit these changes without signing their correction application. Also on the application, there is what we call a need analysis update. This basically is the Department of Education's method of determining students' eligibility for federal student aid. There is what we call the need analysis and also the income protection allowances. Those have been updated for this year for 22-23 based on legislative changes. The income protection allowance, or IPS we call it, protects a family's income associated with basic living expenses and is determined based on a student's household size and the number of people that are in college. So the Department of Education will allow a certain amount of income based on certain living expenses, again, based on a household size. So they look at the types that they look at certain living expenses include food, housing, medical, clothing and personal, transportation, and then they also have another category for other family consumption. So for instance, this year, housing, they've allocated 22% of income for housing. So with a household size of 4, with 2 in college, an example would be for the income protection allowance, they've associated $26,830 that's protected when they're going through and determining a student's eligibility for aid. Also, there's the income threshold for what we call an automatic EFC. The EFC is basically the student's estimated family contribution. And this number basically determines a student's eligibility for aid. And that number or that indicator is basically the federal Department of Education's way of indicating how much a student or a family is expected to pay. But that doesn't necessarily mean when you get that number, that's what you would pay out of pocket. Basically, it's an indicator to determine a student's eligibility. And for this year, in order to receive an automatic 0 EFC, that income threshold remains at $27,000. I think the biggest change for this year are the 2 questions that have been changed on this screen, selective service and also the drug conviction question on the financial aid application. Generally, in the past, in order to receive federal aid, most male students must register with Selective Service in order to be eligible to receive financial aid. And earlier this year, due to a new Simplification Act, that has been removed for a requirement in order to receive federal student aid. The question has been revised. And it does no longer indicate to receive federal student aid. Those words have been removed from the question. It will still ask the student if they want to register with Selective Service, but it does not indicate that it's a requirement in order to receive federal student aid. In addition to that, there is also a question related to drug convictions. In the past, in order to receive federal student aid, there is a question on the application where it asks the student if they were actually convicted of the sale or possession of illegal drugs while receiving federal student aid. If that student answered yes to that question, it will prompt, or it did prompt the student to complete a worksheet to help them determine if their conviction affects their eligibility for aid. And again, based on the Simplification Act earlier this year, that has now been removed from the application. And it reads now at the bottom of the screen, it says a recently passed law means that you're now eligible for federal student aid, even if you have been convicted for the sale or possession of illegal drugs while receiving federal student aid. No further action is required. So now it's not prompting them to actually complete that worksheet. It just lets them know that although they may have been convicted, they can still receive federal student aid. And also here we have a listing of all of our NACIA representatives. So if there's additional questions, information on resources, based on your area code, there are representatives with the contact information that's listed here, phone and email. If you want to reach out to any of the representatives, if you have any questions or if you need additional assistance, these would be the best contacts to actually provide that information for you. In addition to that, there's also information on the student aid website, information in addition to announcements, any updates that may take place or any changes that may take place. There's also information on resources. There's like a financial aid toolkit that will help you if you're actually doing presentations or providing information to students and families. That information is listed on the student aid website. And also their college age services has also provided a webinar on the updates for 22-23. So for more information and more in detailed information, that's a great webinar. In addition to that, they do have additional webinars available on their website. So that is also a good resource for information as well. And I know that was a lot of information, all in a short amount of time. So if you have any questions, I know that Nicole has been filtering the questions through the chat, but if you have any other questions, please feel free.
Thank you, Shannon. So one question that just popped up, could you explain how the verification process has changed this year?
Well, with this year, last year or this current academic year, there was a time frame where we didn't have to verify it in some cases, but that is no longer applicable to the 22-23 application. The biggest thing I would say is the status where students have to verify their high school completion. In some cases, with the verification process, some students had to complete an additional step to verify their high school completion, but that is no longer the case for 22-23. So I would say probably that section is going to be the biggest for 22-23.
Thank you. And there was another question that came a bit earlier. When you use the reset FAFSA form, does it erase all the data entered?
That question, I'm not exactly sure. Sean, are you familiar with that section?
Actually, I am not. I directly responded to that individual telling them that I have not used that functionality, so I'm not 100% sure
Right.
if it totally erases the FAFSA or specifically the data that's in that section of the FAFSA.
Section.
It would make sense to me that it would only erase the information in that specific section, but I'm
Correct.
not
That's
sure.
yes.
And I tried to do a quick search while you were talking on that particular
Mhm.
function, and I could not find the answer.
Yeah, I haven't used it either. So that I'm not exactly sure, but I agree with you. I think it will be just that particular section and not the full application.
The next question I see, how long will it take to get your information back after completing the FAFSA? So how long is that process traditionally?
Normally for us here at UNC Charlotte, once the student completes the application, we normally receive that information within 3 to 5 business days. And once we receive it, we actually send correspondence to the student through their 49er account or their Charlotte account. So we don't mail anything out. So each school is different. So primarily for us, I would say about 3 to 5 business days, and each school is different. Although we haven't started, students can complete the application for 22-23 now. We haven't started that process since we don't have all the updates in our system, but we should, I would say, hopefully within the next few weeks, we should have information going out to students before the holiday break. That's our goal, to get everything sent out. So if a student has been selected for verification, or if we need additional information to process the application, we always send correspondence to their Charlotte, their online account. So I always tell students, make sure once you've done the application, one, make sure you've gotten the confirmation. Two, review that student aid report, and then check with the school, your online account. If you've actually been admitted, I would check with the school to see if they've received any information. And some schools operate on a different basis. For us, we'll only pull in the information for students that have been admitted. Some other schools may pull in all applications. So it all depends on that particular school. But normally, I would say in order to receive it, it's 3 to 5 business days for us.
Wonderful, thank you. The next question I see is, do you have any updates about state and federal scholarships, such as the Pell Grant amount for the year, education lottery, UNC need-based scholarships, and so on?
As far as the state funding, I don't have the amounts yet for the state funding. I haven't reviewed the Pell chart just yet for 22-23. I don't know if it's available just yet. But once the Pell chart is available, soon after, that's when the state will release the award information for the 22-23 application.
We've got a couple more questions. The next one is, how long does it take for a parent and or student to receive their FAFSA ID number? Is it emailed to them?
They'll automatically get it during the process of completing the application. So when they go into the FAFSA form, once they select that role, they will be prompted to complete or to create an account to receive the FSA ID. So they'll get it initially, they'll make it there and get it during the application process. Now, just keep in mind that you'll have to verify like your email and your phone number when you're actually completing or creating that FSA ID, but it's one that you create and you'll have that information as you're doing the application. So you'll have it once you submit it.
And then the next question I see is, can you just go over again how it works with a student who is independent?
There are dependents, or I'm sorry. Was there any, you said the dependency status or
So
question?
I'm assuming what they mean is like an emancipated student.
Okay, yeah, on the application, there is a section for dependency status questions, and they will ask, for instance, if you're married, if you have dependents, on active duty, if you're a veteran, there's different questions on the application, and depending on how a student answers that questions, it will prompt them to either put in parents' information, or if they answer yes, it will actually only include that student's information. So we'll ask if they were in foster care or orphan or ward of the court, depending on a certain time frame. It will list the information there on the application, and they will answer based on how it's worded. And if they answer yes to any of those questions, then they wouldn't actually have to have parents' information. Most schools will, if they answer yes, will require some type of documentation to show that they were an orphan or ward of the court. So that will prompt them once they actually complete the application. A school may ask for additional documentation to verify their status.
Thank you. Okay, so this is a common question, but a great question for the group. What if a student is not able to get their parents' information? So simply the parent is not willing to provide it after the student turns 18. So
Okay.
thinking about their social security number and all of that important information.
Okay, if a student, there's two different things. If a student's parents are unwilling to provide information, there's a process that we can go through and we can do what we call a professional judgment in that case, and collect documentation from the student stating that parents are not willing, and if parents are not supporting the student, we can offer what we call an unsubsidized loan to the student. The student will only receive loans. Now, if there's a situation where students are removed or no longer in the household based on extenuating circumstances, meaning if there was history of abuse, abandonment, if there is court documentations, police reports, that information is included. We will collect that information to do what we call a dependency override. But there has to be documentation from third parties, court documentation, where we can actually go through and do a professional judgment in that manner to allow the students to complete the application on their own. But there's a difference between parents refusing and not willing and not supporting the student versus a student is unable to obtain that information to complete the application.
The next question is, what documentation would be required for a student that selects legal guardianship under dependency status?
They'll ask for a court document showing that they're in legal guardianship or were in legal guardianship. So typically it's court documentation that we will actually ask for in those circumstances. So it's actual court documentation.
And Shannon, if I can piggyback just to elaborate on that a little further, they don't actually submit the documentation to the U.S. Department of Education or to FAFSA. That would be requested that documentation be submitted to the financial aid office.
Correct. Thank you for that. Yes.
And the last question that I see, if a student is adopted, how would a parent answer the question of being homeless? And it says they can't remember the wording exactly on the form.
If a student is adopted and they're currently, meaning their adopted parents are homeless, or are they referring to birth parents? I'm not sure if I understand the question directly.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand it myself. Because if they are adopted, they would have a guardian to provide information on the FAFSA. I'm not
Right, they will
sure.
provide the adopted parents'
Yeah,
information.
it's almost like two different things. You've got an adopted student, but then also asking about the student being homeless, which are two different scenarios.
Right.
So if that counselor can send a little bit more information. Okay, I see. The student is adopted and they were homeless in an orphanage before being adopted.
Oh.
Hmm.
That's a different case.
Yeah, that's a different scenario. I've not encountered that
Because I
scenario
think
before.
on the FAFSA form, it asked if they were homeless. It gives a time frame, depending on the dates on the FAFSA form. Let me see if I can pull up. Give me 1 second, because I do have a copy here on the application. It will ask. Okay. Yeah, it asks on the 22-23 application. The question reads, at any time on or after July 1st of 2021, did the director of an emergency shelter or transitional housing program funded by the Department of Housing and Urban Development determine that you are an unaccompanied youth who was homeless or were self-supporting at the risk of being homeless? So it gives a time frame. So I would assume, dependent on the time frame, how they would answer that question. If not, then they would use the adoptive parent's information on the application.
I'm glad you had that FAFSA handy. Thank you, Shannon.
Yes.
It's a long question, but yeah, because it also reads the same question, and almost similar. On or after July 1st of 2021, did your high school or school district homeless liaison determine that you are an unaccompanied youth who was homeless or were self-supporting and at risk of being homeless? So I think it all refers to that time frame. So depending on that time frame is how the student will answer that question. And if not, then if they can't answer yes based on that time frame, then they would have to put parents' information on the application.
So we have a couple of more, and I see we have a few more minutes, a couple more questions that have popped up. So going back to a student whose parent is unwilling to give information, is it best that they go ahead and complete the FAFSA or call the school directly to do the professional judgment process?
No, they'll go ahead and complete the application. And on those questions where it has the dependency status questions, they'll answer no to all of those questions. Or if they answer no to all of those questions, it will ask the student, it will indicate, we see that you're a dependent student. Do you want to provide information for your parents? Or if you're unable, you can still proceed with the application. I would still go through with the application. It will show incomplete in a sense, because if they answer no to all the dependency status questions, but they don't have parents' information listed, it will show as incomplete. They can still process it, but because parents' information is not listed, they'll want to contact the school after they've done the application to let them know their situation. And then that school will indicate or give the steps on what information or what documentation is needed in order to complete that process.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I'll do two more questions, and if there are any additional questions that come in, we will email you all with the responses of those questions. But the first question is, how does a student proceed with FAFSA if they are currently living in foster care? The student has already turned 18, but they're still enrolled in high school.
In that case, I think it will still be the same as a student whose parents is actually unwilling, but
Yes.
On the application, it asks them at any time since you turned 13, were both parents deceased, were you in foster care, or were you a dependent or ward of the court? If they can answer yes to that question, then they wouldn't have to put parents' information on the application, but the school may require documentation to show that they were or are in foster care. So in that case, if they're in high school, it asks at any time since you turned 13 where you're in foster care. They will answer yes to that question. It's going to skip parents' information. It will ask for their tax information, but the school may request documentation.
Very last question is somewhat similar, but would a student that is a ward of the state, so a foster child, file as an independent? I think you've gone over this. File as an independent in order to receive funds by the state as well. Student states that tuition would be covered by foster care.
It sounds like maybe eligible for the NC REACH program. I'm thinking it sounds like if to receive funding based on their status. But as far as the application, again, that will be the same question in reference to foster care. So if at any time since they turn 13, they're going to answer yes to that question. But again, there may be a request from the school to submit court documentation or some type of documentation to verify that they were or are in foster care.
Thank you so much. And I see that Catherine has put some really wonderful resources in the chat for you all to access. Catherine, did you want to say anything about those resources?
No, I was just trying to follow along with you all. The studentaid.gov has wonderful stuff, one pagers on who is my parent and those other things that Shannon's been discussing. And then there's local assistance right near you that you can get access to. CFNC.org has a map that I posted a link to with all of the institutions in North Carolina, the community colleges, the private institutions, the UNC system schools. You click on it and it's the contact information for each financial aid office. And I'm sure Shannon would say this, but I have known financial aid administrators are so generous, and you can walk in the door and ask for help. You can encourage your families to walk in the door, whether they're applying or have been admitted or whatever.
Absolutely correct. And we also, I know with, as far as depending on where you are, with us, we also have what we call here at UNC Charlotte, our Niner Central. It's basically a one-stop shop where you can get questions answered about financial aid, student accounts, registrar's office. And if you're not able to actually come in person, there is an option also to do Zoom meetings as well. So if you actually go to our website, you can actually do that as well. But like you say, anytime you have any questions, feel free. We're here. We're here.
Yeah, financial aid administrators are some generous people, so they are interested in getting your students the help they need, no matter what. Right. So the other thing I was just going to mention was the NC REACH is a scholarship that I put a link to that Shannon mentioned. There's also a scholarship search on CFNC.org. If you haven't been to that, you want to encourage your students to go, and they can kind of filter by different characteristics about the scholarship. And then earlier this in the session, there was a question about the CFNC representatives, and I put a link in to those folks because there are also some local people that are in the different parts of the state, embedded in the communities around the state. So seek them out because they can help if you're wanting to host an event at your school and you need some help planning that, a college access event, they could do that. And then there is Juana Hernandez and Juanes, I forget his last name. The two Spanish services representatives are terrific resources too. So all of that's on that page, and they'll be very, very responsive if you need their help.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all so much. Before I let you go, I did want to plug in our last two sessions for this week. Tomorrow, we have a CFNC update session that will start at 9 a.m. as well. And then on Friday, we have a session around Finish the FAFSA and the tracker. So we hope to see you all there. Shannon, thank you so much for presenting. You did a wonderful job.
Thank
We
you.
really, really appreciate it. Sean and Catherine, as always, thank you for your support. And to all the attendees, you are supposed to receive a certificate for your CEUs. If for whatever reason you don't, please send me an email at outreach@ncsecaa.edu. I'll be sending those certificates out this afternoon if you do not receive it. Okay? You all have a wonderful day. We hope to see you all soon.